Awfully nice to be here. This is the fourth senior center that I've been to in the past week. A couple of you have already heard me at some of the other centers, so you'll get a little repeat performance here today. But hopefully all of you will learn something today, and particularly that you'll learn some things today that you've never heard anyone say before. I'm a doctor of psychology, but I'm not a medical doctor. And even if I were a medical doctor, I wouldn't be giving you medical advice here. That's between you and your doctor. Okay, I'm going to talk about some things that you might want to talk about with your doctor, and I might suggest some things that you do in terms of changing what you eat. If you have diabetes, anybody here with diabetes? Okay, you got to be very careful not to change your diet without talking to your doctor, because when I tell you to stop eating certain foods, it may mean that you need to change your medication. That's not a bad thing. What I'm talking about is actually being able to lower your medication, or in some cases, people go off their medication altogether. Listen to what I have to say, and then if you want to make some changes, if you're on medication, be sure to talk to your doctor before you do that. Okay? How many have heard that fat and cholesterol are bad for you?
Yeah.
Anybody?
Everybody.
Everybody, right. Okay. We've been told that for the past 40 years, haven't we?
Yeah.
Lower the amount of fat in your diet and keep cholesterol to a minimum. Okay? How many people have stopped eating eggs because of this? Anybody?
I eat the white, not
You eat the whites, right, because the cholesterol is all in the yolks.
I eat the whole thing.
Good for you. I'm going to suggest that that's exactly what you do. I eat eggs every morning, okay? My cholesterol's never been better. And once you understand something about cholesterol, that cholesterol comes from your body, from your liver, which manufactures it. If you cut back the amount of cholesterol you eat, your liver's just going to make more to make up the difference. Okay? That's exactly how it works. And the Dietary Advisory Committee several years ago said cholesterol is no longer a nutrient of concern. You don't have to worry about it. There are a few people, very small percentage of the population, 2 or 3%, who have a very high inherited cholesterol levels, okay? And they'll know it because they're being treated for it. And they probably shouldn't be adding more cholesterol to their diet because their bodies are working differently than most of ours, okay? But otherwise, don't worry about cholesterol. What about this message about fat? We've been told for years that fat's bad for us. Why? There it is. Clogs your arteries. Thank you. That's the plumbing theory, okay, of heart disease. That if you eat fat, particularly what kind of fat? Saturated fat, okay? Fat that's solid at room temperature. You know, when you cook some bacon and you pour the fat off in a jar and it solidifies at room temperature, that's saturated fat.
Fat from hamburgers.
Okay. And hamburgers and meats and everything, okay? That's a natural fat that comes from natural foods, meat, okay? That is perfectly okay for your body, even though you've been told that it's going to clog your arteries. Just like if you pour that fat down your drain, and you do that enough times, yeah, you'll have to call the plumber.
Right.
Right. But that's not how your body works. Your body doesn't take the fat that you eat and put it into your arteries. The fat in your arteries, the deposits in your arteries, come from eating refined grains and carbohydrates. Okay? Now, we didn't know that 40 years ago. There was a guy who came up with a theory about fat being the cause of heart disease. How many people remember Eisenhower? Okay? Yeah. Okay. Anybody remember that he had a heart attack?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he did. And it scared the living daylights out of most white men in America because they thought they might have one too. And in fact, there were a lot of men having heart attacks back in the 50s and 60s. People were very concerned about it and wanted to know the cause. Well, a guy by the name of Ansel Keys, a researcher out in Minnesota, did a study where he looked at different countries and the amount of fat that they ate and how many heart attacks they had. And he concluded that the countries that ate a lot of fat had a higher level of heart attacks. And he promoted that all over the country and got a lot of people to agree with him. The only problem was he was wrong. He fudged his data. He took out the countries like France that didn't go along with his conclusions. How many people have ever eaten French food? Okay, what do the French eat? Not if you're everything. Thank you. Okay, and they don't have any fear of eating fat, right? In fact, a lot of French cooking is full of fat. Okay, and France has the lowest level of heart disease in all of Europe. Okay, so the researchers said this doesn't make sense. Okay, people are eating a lot of fat and having very few heart attacks. Meanwhile, back in the United States, we're telling people to not eat fat, and people continue to have heart attacks. But they didn't change the advice about eating fat. What do you think really led to Eisenhower's heart attack?
Stress.
Stress, and one other thing people forget.
Stress.
Stress, and one other thing people forget. He smoked cigarettes. Okay? No one said anything about smoking and heart disease back in the 50s. Okay? It wasn't till almost 20 years later that we advised people to cut back on smoking or cut it out altogether to reduce your risk of heart disease. But because
why are they still selling cigarettes then?
why are they? That's a good question.
Government's making money.
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of companies want to make a lot of money, that's why. Okay. So this idea that fat clogs your arteries and causes heart disease was the basis for the advice to not eat fat, okay, and particular saturated fat for all those years. But research has begun to look at that and discovered that, in fact, the fat that you eat doesn't turn to fat in your bloodstream, but in fact, eating excess sugar and carbohydrates. What are carbohydrates? Bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, and all those sweets that we eat, okay? All of those, okay? Right, candy bars, ice cream, you name it, okay? If you walk into a grocery store today and look at the center aisles, okay, they're loaded with carbohydrates, okay? That's nearly all they are. If you want to eat food that isn't carbohydrates, you go to the outside. You go to the vegetables, you go to the meat, you go to the cheese, okay? But the stuff in the middle of the store is basically the stuff that gives us heart attacks, okay? And most of it comes in a package.
Processed.
It's processed, right? Highly processed, and has things on the label you can't even read, much less understand, okay? All kinds of preservatives and one thing or another. So, basically, what we've been told about fat and cholesterol is wrong. What if you're diabetic or pre-diabetic? What advice do you get? What kind of diet are you supposed to eat? One that's low in?
Cops.
No, well, unless you're, depending on who you're talking to, a lot of them will tell you to eat a low-fat diet, okay? And they don't say a lot about carbs, okay? They should. If you've got a good, up-to-date dietitian, you're going to find out that carbs are the cause of your diabetes in the first place, and you really need to cut those back. But at the same time, they're telling you to cut back fat. So what's left to eat? Nothing, right? And that's the problem, okay? They may say, well, keep your carbs low, but then they say cut your fat out. The only thing you have left is protein. Do you need a lot of protein? No, not much at all, about 4 ounces a day, okay? If you eat a lot more protein, what does that protein turn into in your body? It turns into carbohydrates in your body, which then turn to fat, and we'll talk about that. So, when we eat low-fat diets, we take fat out of the diet, we're always hungry. When we try to restrict our calories, anybody been on a low-fat diet where you can't eat more than so much of this and so much of that? That's called calorie restriction. Okay, and what happens when you cut back on the calorie? How do you feel? Lousy and tired, but what else? Hungry, okay? When you cut back on your calories, you're starving, all right? And yes, over a few weeks you'll lose some weight, okay? But you don't feel good, okay? And as soon as you brought your weight down to where you want it, you go back to eating the way you were, and what happens? Goes right back up again, okay? So low-fat diets are rarely successful in the long run, okay? Mainly because they make you hungry, and hunger always wins, okay? Low-fat foods are full of sugar. How many people eat yogurt?
Yeah.
Okay? How many people eat yogurt that's full fat and no added sugar? Anybody? You do. Well, how does it taste? It tastes good to you. If any one of the rest of us were to try that kind of yogurt, how would they like it? They wouldn't. Why? It's not sweet enough. It's sour. Right? Okay? So unless you've learned to eat yogurt, real full-fat yogurt without sugar, okay, from a little child, you're going to think that that yogurt is nasty, okay? And you, like most Americans, you're going to want to put some added sugar in. So conveniently, the food manufacturers have added a lot of sugar. You buy one of those little yogurt cups, in the bottom is this whole layer of jelly, okay, that you mix in. And then when you look at the label, you say, wow, carbohydrates, 22, 28, 30, 36. You're getting several tablespoons full of jam with that, okay? Very highly sugared, okay? It helps to eat the yogurt, but it doesn't help in terms of your body and weight gain. They may have taken the fat out of the yogurt, but they put the sugar in. And what does sugar convert to when it's in your body and you don't burn it or use it for heat? Carbohydrates, right? And the carbohydrates turn into glucose, which is sugar in your blood. So your blood sugar goes up. When that happens, your pancreas produces insulin to try to get rid of the sugar in your blood. And the next thing you know, it's putting the sugar, the glucose from your blood into your cells to store as fat. Okay. So body fat doesn't come from fat you eat. Body fat comes from the sugars and carbohydrates you eat and don't need for energy. Okay? So you can lose your weight by starving, but you'll gain it all back, and your blood sugar levels are never good. Why is it not good to have high blood sugar?
Cause stroke.
Well, if your blood sugar is way high, you can have problems. If it's too low, you can have problems. But if you run high blood sugar all the time, what do we call that? If you have excess sugar in your blood all the time, what disease is that? Diabetes. Okay. Pre-diabetes, it just means you have more than you need and it's getting up there. Diabetes means you've got so much now that you're starting to have problems, and your sugar levels can get quite high if you either don't know about it. Can you feel the blood sugar in your body? Can you tell when your blood sugar is high? No, absolutely not. Okay? You have no sensation with it. If it's super high, 500, 600, then you're going to have problems. Right.
Yeah, because you go into a coma.
Right.
Yeah.
But when it's moderately high, okay, you have no symptoms, all right? Meanwhile, what's happening inside your body when you're running high levels of blood sugar? Well, you don't feel that. What damage is it causing?
Because I lose your eyesight.
Thank you. Yeah. Your eyes, okay? The little blood vessels, the capillaries in the back of your eye, because sugar in the blood is toxic, it begins to eat away at those blood vessels, and then they burst, and suddenly you've lost your eyesight. That's called retinopathy, okay? And people who have uncontrolled high blood sugar for long periods of time often end up losing their eyesight. My grandmother did. I saw that firsthand. There's also little blood vessels, capillaries in your kidneys. And when those break down from too high blood sugar, Then you have to get dialysis. You have to go to the kidney dialysis center. And if the blood vessels in your toes and fingers stop taking care of the nerves there, and then you stop feeling things in your toes and fingers,
You can lose them.
then you'll get a cut and you don't feel it, and it gets infected and you don't feel it, and if it goes too far, too long, you end up with gangrene, and they have to remove your toes or feet, or some people lose half their leg, okay? That's because the blood sugar is causing your blood vessels to break down. So whenever your blood sugar is high, essentially anything over 140, you're starting to do damage to your blood vessels, okay? At the same time, we've got grocery stores full of things that make your blood sugar go up, okay? Anybody want to guess the percentage of people in the United States now who are pre-diabetic or diabetic?
I say about 80%.
Well, it's not quite as high as 80, but it's getting up there, okay? About 38% are pre-diabetic, they're on their way to having diabetes, and about 14% already have diabetes. Together, that's 52%. Over half of Americans have measured high blood sugar, okay? So that's a lot of people. Some people think that even people who don't have high blood sugar, who are on their way, and there are ways of measuring high insulin levels, that may account for as much as 67% of the population. So it's a lot of people. That means that any room full of average people, half the people there need to pay attention to what I'm talking about. The other half probably do okay. And if they don't have elevated blood sugar and they keep getting it checked every couple of years, they're probably fine. Okay, so if you're not in that category, don't worry about it. But know that many of the people, friends of yours may very well have this condition. The easiest way to believe that somebody has high blood sugar is to look at their weight. Because when you have high blood sugar, your body's trying to deal with the glucose in your blood, is parking that excess sugar in your fat cells, and you're gaining weight. But that's not always the case. Not everybody who's overweight is diabetic, and not everybody who's diabetic is overweight. But in general, if your weight's going up, you really need to pay attention to whether your blood sugar is going up at the same time, okay? And even if your weight isn't going up, you still need to get your blood sugar checked, because you may be diabetic without having increased weight, okay? Well, we're already at the slide for the dietary guidelines, okay? Who is the United States Dietary Association in the first place? Who do they work for? Where does that come from?
Food and drink.
Pardon me?
Food and drink.
Well, right, they have a lot of control over the advice that we're given, okay, and they issue things like the food pyramid and my plate and the kinds of things that dietitians will talk to you about, okay? And they say we need to eat a balanced meal and da-da-da-da-da, okay? That comes from the Department of Agriculture. USDA is the Department of Agriculture. What are they mostly in charge of? If you're the agriculture department in this country, what do you spend most of your money on?
Vegetables. Fruit.
Well, on growing things
Bombs.
and farms, right. And most of the farms in America, by geography, grow what? Corn, wheat, okay, oats. Not so much, very, very small percentage goes into vegetables, okay? First of all, it doesn't take that much space to grow vegetables. Unlike you've seen the fields of wheat and corn, okay? You don't see fields of broccoli like that, okay? But the USDA is primarily concerned with grain, okay? We produce grain not only for this country, but for people around the world, okay? So if you're in the business of making recommendations about eating grain, and then you come out with recommendations about what people should eat, what do you end up doing? You recommend that people eat grain, okay? That's why cereal, okay, and rice, okay, and bread, all these things made with grains were at the base of the food pyramid. We were told to eat 6 to 11 servings of rice, potatoes, bread, etc. Okay? And if you do that, you follow those recommendations, you're probably getting upwards of 300 grams of carbohydrates a day. That's a huge amount. Yet we recommended that for years, starting in 1980. So we started with those recommendations and said people should eat a lot of carbohydrates and eat very little fat. Remember, fat was at the top of the pyramid. Okay, lots of carbs, very little fat. And then what happened to people's weight in the country? It went up. What happened to diabetes rates? They went up. So for the past 40 years, we've been telling people to do something that has made them sicker every year. Okay. Was there a lot of research on that? No. I just told you what the research was. It was a flawed researcher who convinced everybody that fat was the problem, so nobody paid any attention to sugars and grains, okay? And we never got advice to limit sugar until recently. We never got advice to eat a lot of fat. We were told, eat very little. Over the last 10 or 15 years, researchers have begun to contradict these recommendations to avoid fatty meats. We still believe in getting daily exercise, and eating vegetables is a good thing. But it's the fat content that has been the big problem for all these years, because we've followed the advice of the government. We've cut fats. The food manufacturers helped us out by creating thousands of low-fat products in the store, even though they had lots of added sugar. And yet our weight continued to go up. We kept getting more diabetic, and there's even a connection to heart disease in this. All those things were happening, and yet they continue to give the same advice. Well, as far as I'm concerned, their advice isn't worth the paper it's printed on, and I'll tell you why. What I'm telling you is fat and cholesterol are not bad for us. People feel fuller longer when they eat fat. Carbohydrates convert to body fat easily, which is why we should avoid them. And cutting carbs forces your body to burn its own fat. That's how you lose weight. I just handed you out an article that says, is this any way to lose weight? Well, in fact, it is, by eating more fat. And it's easier to stay on a low-carb diet long-term because you don't get hungry. Okay? 2 new books have come out this year. One by a physician who worked at the Harvard School of Public Health and who worked with overweight adolescents. Dr. David Ludwig at Harvard Medical School, working with adolescents, found that when he put them on, tried to put them on low-fat diets, okay, and calorie-restricted diets, it didn't work. They couldn't follow them. They were hungry all the time, and they weren't losing weight. So he said, let's switch this up. Let's give them plenty of fat and cut the carbs. What happened? They lost weight. Their type 2 diabetes resolved, went away. And in some cases, their fatty liver disease went away. They got better by eating more fat and fewer carbohydrates, okay? So he came out with a book for all of us called Always Hungry. That's based on the idea that when you eat low-fat diets, you're always hungry. You're not getting enough fat. Another physician, Dr. Mark Hyman, from the Cleveland Clinic, it's kind of like the Harvard of the Midwest, has been writing books for the last 10 years, but his most recent one is simply entitled Eat Fat, Get Thin. Okay? And if you understand how a low-carbohydrate diet works, you understand that when you eat more fat, you lose weight. Okay? Not what we thought, and certainly not what we've been told. First of all, when you put more fat in the diet, you feel full longer. How many people have had the experience of drinking whole milk? Anybody drink whole milk? Versus drinking skim milk. Anybody drink skim milk? Right. When you drink skim milk, there's no fat in it, okay? So all the fat's been removed. What's left is the sugar, natural sugar from the milk, the lactase, and water. The vitamin D that they put back into it, because it's gone when they take the fat out artificially, that vitamin D goes right through you too, because there's no fat. Vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin. You have to have fat when you take your vitamin D, or it will leave your body, okay? So what we've done with milk is make it entirely useless. I call skim milk white soda because it's essentially sugar water. Yeah. But full-fat milk, if you ever notice the difference, when you have a glass of full-fat milk, you stay full for a longer period of time because there's good natural fats in that take a while to digest. Fats take about 6 to 8 hours to digest. Sugars and carbohydrates take about 2 to 3 hours. So it goes right through and you're hungry again. We recommended that children in school have low-fat or no-fat milk. First of all, it tastes terrible. The kids won't drink it. So what they do?
My grandson won't.
What is that?
My grandson won't
Right.
drink low-fat milk.
There you go. Right. Kids are smart. They say, this is awful. I'm not going to drink this.
No, he
But
won't.
to make them drink it, what do? We put chocolate flavoring and 6 grams of sugar in those little cartons, okay? So it's bad enough that they're getting sugar water to start with. They're getting even more sugar. We might as well give them Coca-Cola, okay? It's crazy, okay? They never did a study on the effects of full-fat milk versus low-fat milk on children before we implemented the policy in all the schools in the country. Never studied it. Years after we've been doing it, they did studies and compared kids who drank full-fat milk with kids who drank low-fat milk and found that the kids who drank full-fat milk were not gaining weight as much as the kids who were drinking low-fat milk, okay? In other words, more fat means you don't gain weight, okay? I know it sounds crazy because of what we've been taught, but it's putting fat back into things that makes you feel full longer. If you're a chef, you know that fat, remember Julia Child?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
She used to cook with what all the time?
Butter.
Butter,
Butter.
okay?
Butter.
Lots of butter, okay? And of course, the nutritionists went crazy, what are you recommending, etc. Well, she was right, Not only does it make the food taste better, it's better for you. Now, she also baked and cooked a lot of things that had a lot of carbs in it, so I'm not saying she was a low-carbohydrate diet advocate, but she had the right idea about fat, that fat's not harmful to you. There's been research that's been done over the past 10 years. One study headed up by the guy who worked for the American Heart Association, who concluded that fat, including saturated fat, had no effect on heart disease, none whatsoever. There's no reason to talk about fat or saturated fat causing heart disease. And in fact, he's been one of the chief proponents of saying we need to cut the carbohydrates out of the diet because that's what leads to heart disease. I could do a whole other session on exactly what happens to cause heart disease, the difference between HDL and LDL cholesterol, and what the very low density particles are doing in your bloodstream and causing irritation in your artery walls, and then your body's cholesterol tries to heal them and it makes a little scab inside your artery walls and those burst and then you have a heart attack. That's the one sentence version, okay? But there's a lot of research around that now. And if you talk to any cardiologist, because they have to keep up with this stuff, they'll tell you it's not eating fat that gives you a heart attack. It's eating the cakes, the cookies, the ice cream, and all that kind of stuff. And also family history and not getting enough exercise. And, there are other factors as well, but certainly eating fat is not the big bugaboo that we were told years ago and continue to be told. Even though it's interesting, the Dietary Advisory Committee came out the beginning of last year with their new recommendations. They took out any limits on fat, on dietary fat. It's not in there. But they never said anything. They didn't say, oops, we were wrong, and now we've taken out the limit on fat. They just didn't include it, okay? And they still talk about choose lean meats, choose low-fat dairy products, etc. So the advice continues to be pretty bogus and not in line with current research. There are efforts nationally to get those guidelines changed. I'm part of a group that's trying to do that. But in the meantime, all we can do here in Fall River is to help people understand what the latest research is on nutrition. The things you're going to hear from your dietitian, you talk to any of them, and I talk to them all the time, most of them will say that what I'm saying is not supported by evidence, is wrong, blah, 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 blah. Well, they don't want to listen to the evidence, and I got plenty of it. I can show it to them all. But they were trained at a time when low-fat was the thing. They are not going back to school every day, so they're not hearing that, and they continue to do the same thing. So I don't blame them. That's what they were taught. But people need to get their own information, learn more about this topic, and if you decide that this is the way you want to go, particularly if you have diabetes, you need to study it a little bit. You can come to a class that I have every Saturday morning from 10 to 11 o'clock at the Cuss Middle School. I teach a whole group of people about low-carbohydrate, high-fat diets, and this week we're going to be reviewing some of the things I just said here, and then next week we'll talk about grains, and we'll talk about vegetables, we'll talk about how to put more fat in your diet, all kinds of things. So it's a great series. It's absolutely free. Yep.
You're saying, like, if you eat fats, it's good for you.
Yeah.
All right, I have a daughter-in-law that's strictly vegetarian.
Mm-hmm.
And she don't eat any meat.
That's, yep. You can be a vegetarian and do a high-fat, low-carb diet.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. There are a lot of natural fats. Let me give you one example. This is something I use all the time. Coconut oil. Okay, it's entirely vegetarian. It's a vegetable, coconuts. Okay, yet it's saturated fat. It's a good saturated fat. This, along with butter, which some vegetarians will do dairy, some won't, but depending. And olive oil is the third great healthy fat. Okay, and people say, well, olive oil is fine because it's not saturated. No, they're wrong. 20% of olive oil is saturated. Okay. You have to know something about fats before you make recommendations like that. So those are fats that you can use. The one thing you have to avoid if you're a vegetarian is getting too many carbohydrates, too many grains, okay? But there are lots of vegetables. Just about any vegetable that grows above the ground, you know, tomatoes, beans, asparagus, broccoli, cauliflower, all those. Above the ground vegetables are naturally low in carbohydrates. I eat cauliflower all the time. Basically replaced potatoes, which I used to eat all the time on my low-fat diet days. Replace that with cauliflower, which you can rice or mash. You can cut up and put in the oven and broil it, and all kinds of things. Great cauliflower recipes. There was even a cauliflower shortage this past winter, and I think it's because so many people are on low-carb diets. Okay. Pardon me? You don't like it? Well, I didn't like it either because it has no flavor, right? Right.
I just don't like it.
Well, learn some recipes. You can put all kinds of things on it. Everything from cheese and spices and tomato sauce,
Right.
You name it, okay? You won't taste the cauliflower.
My daughter-in-law's tried to.
Yeah.
And she's tried to make my grandson a vegetarian.
Yep.
He can eat all his vegetables.
Sure. Those are good
But
things to
he
eat.
still wants his steak and potatoes,
Well, I'd agree with his eating the steak.
you know?
Okay.
So,
Right.
and my son's a diabetic.
Yeah.
My daughter's a diabetic.
Yeah.
My
So-
mother, all my
so you
mother's
got-
family
well,
was a diabetic.
If you've got diabetics in the family,
And
I
don't
would
have it.
suggest that they pay attention to this and learn some things. I'm not saying everybody should dive into low-carbohydrate diets without knowing something about it. Okay, there are some things you need to learn to do it well and be successful with it. Okay, but there's a lot of good information. So let me just review this, that the idea of the calories is what counts. How many people think that 100 grams of broccoli is equivalent to 100 grams of Coca-Cola?
Of course it is.
Of course it is. Well, calorie-wise it is. You know, if you had 100 grams
Oh, Lucy's here.
of broccoli, it'd be about, you know, about almost a quart of broccoli, okay? And then 100 grams of one of those little cans of Coca-Cola. Calorie-wise, they're equivalent. What happens in your body? Does the broccoli turn to fat in your body?
Soda does.
Pardon me?
Soda
The
does.
soda does, but the broccoli doesn't turn to fat because it's not full of glucose, not full of sugar.
Better.
Pardon me?
That's why it's better. But
That's why it's better, right. But,
I like Coke.
well, Coca-Cola, the company, has hired all kinds of nutritionists and scientists to try to convince you that Coke is equivalent to any other food. And what do they say? It's all about energy balance, okay? And that you can include Coca-Cola in your diet as long as you do what? What do you have to do if you're drinking a Coca-Cola? Well, use it moderately, but every time you drink that Coca-Cola, your body's going to turn it to fat unless you do what?
Drink whiskey.
No. Actually, you can drink whiskey on a low-carb diet.
I don't want.
Yeah. Well, they're going to tell you have to burn it off, okay? Unfortunately, you drink 1 can of Coke, you're going to have to run for 5 to 10 miles to burn that off. And very few people do that. So a lot of people continue to drink Coke and don't get the exercise that would burn that off, and they end up gaining weight. So this idea about energy balance is kind of crazy. The type of food that we eat, fats versus carbs, matters as much as how much we eat. And remember, I said that insulin is the hormone that is primarily responsible for converting glucose into fat, okay? When we gain too much weight over the years, we become insulin resistant. That is to say, our bodies no longer let the insulin work the way it's supposed to, so the sugar doesn't leave our bloodstream, so we end up with high blood sugar, and then we have to take insulin or diabetes medications. If you simply cut back on the amount of carbohydrates that you're eating, you can cut back on your medication, and I know many people who go on low-carb diets who go off their diabetes medication altogether. I discovered that when 8 years ago, my A1C, if you know that's a measure of diabetes, was 6.3. 6.5 is diabetes, okay? Well, 6.3 would be good for a lot of diabetics. You want to guess what my blood sugar is now after being on a low-carbohydrate diet for those years? 5.1, okay, which is normal, okay? No meds, just change my diet, okay? And that happens to everyone who changes their diet by reducing their carbohydrates and increasing their fats, okay? So this isn't only about losing weight, this is also about keeping yourself from having diabetes, okay? So whenever glucose from digested carbs that is not immediately burned by our muscles or our brain or is used for heat, you know, keep our body warm, is converted by insulin to stored fat. And then the only way stored fat is burned is when you have too little carbohydrates or glucose on board. So when you cut your carbs, your body has to look for energy somewhere, and it goes to the fat in your body, which is why when people go on low-carbohydrate diets, they lose a lot of weight because they're burning their own body fat, okay? And so to burn fat, one has to reduce your available glucose or blood sugar primarily by reducing your carbohydrates, okay? And this isn't about the amount, though it's very interesting. When you go on a low-carb, high-fat diet, because the fat keeps you full longer, you end up not being hungry, so you eat less, okay? I used to eat about 2,300 to 2,500 calories a day. Now I'm down to about 1,700 a day because of the fat that I eat. Typical breakfast is a couple of eggs, some sausage, no toast, okay? No sugar in my coffee, okay? A lunch will be some meat or cheese or something of that sort. There's a low-carb bread you can buy that's only, I eat half of one of the wraps. It's 4 grams of carbohydrate. And then vegetable salad. I have a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich many days of the week, okay? Bacon's fine, the lettuce, tomatoes, all good for me. Piece of cheese, and half an avocado. How many people have eaten an avocado? Okay, the rest of you have a treat in store. You know what they are? You've seen them in the store. They look like a green pear. Okay, and if you buy them in the store, they're going to be hard as a rock. You have to wait a few days until they get soft enough that you can kind of press your thumb into them a little bit. Cut it in half. There's a big pit in there. Don't eat that. Take the pit out. And I just eat the half with a little salt. It just gives it a little extra flavor. It's very good. If you don't like it that way, you can scoop it out, combine it with some onions and tomatoes and make guacamole. And a lot of people do that. Some people just mix it up, put it on a sandwich. You can use it in place of mayonnaise. Okay, it's very good because it's very high in fat. Okay, and has enormous quantities of vitamins and minerals. So it's a very good food, which is why I eat it. We talked about diabetes and how that develops with too many carbohydrates, and that stands to reason. You mentioned it earlier that if you have diabetes, you need to cut back on your carbs. They'll tell you that, but they won't say increase your fats. And unless you increase your fats, you're going to be hungry. So you go back to eating the carbs. Okay, that's pretty much how it works. And if you don't have diabetes yet, eat as if you did. Okay, that'll prevent it. If you do have, stop eating the foods that make you sick. The cartoon says you can enjoy diabetes, high cholesterol, and hypertension, that's high blood pressure, or you can suffer from good health. Okay, so if you want, those three conditions, by the way, go together, diabetes, high cholesterol, and high blood pressure. They're called metabolic syndrome. They all come from insulin resistance, okay, from having too many carbs on board for too long, okay? So they're the same cause. And heart disease comes from having insulin resistance or diabetes. Half of the people who die of a heart attack have diabetes. We suspect that at least half of the remaining actually had diabetes and didn't know it, okay? So if you want to prevent heart disease, you've got to prevent diabetes. If you want to prevent diabetes, you've got to cut your carbs and increase your fats, okay? That's as simple as I can state it there. That's just what we said about reducing carbs and increase exercise is important, okay, to reduce diabetes, okay? Everybody needs to exercise no matter what, okay? That's good for all kinds of things. Not particularly good for losing weight, but good for a lot of other things. And increase healthy fat. So here's the doctor saying the high carb diet I put you on 20 years ago gave you diabetes, high blood pressure, and heart disease. Oops. Okay. Our doctor's going to say, oops, everything I told you is wrong? No. Yeah, no. Now some smart doctors, and there's some, I work with Dr. Rocha over at Hawthorne in New Bedford. He's very much on this. He recommends people eat a Mediterranean diet, which is lots of olive oil and vegetables, okay, fish and things like that, and excellent, okay. But he started his practice that way, so he doesn't have to say oops. But doctors who've been telling you to cut the fat, you know, and cut the calories so you'll lose some weight, and it never happens, and you can't do it, and they keep saying the same thing over and over again, okay, they have a hard time changing. What is changing is some of the dietitians, I work with a couple over at South Coast in the diabetes program, both Amanda Raposo and Michael C. Will, if you walk in there and say, I want to go on a low-carb diet, they'll work with you on that because they get excellent results from people who do, okay? So there are dietitians in this community who will do that. If you go to St. Anne's and see Rose Kudo, she will work with you on lowering the carbs in your diet. Their problem is they have a hard time getting people to give up cakes, candy, ice cream, all those goodies. But right, you know what the secret of this is? When you cut out those foods, in about 5 days, you will no longer be interested in them. And you won't believe me until you do it and see what I'm talking about. Okay? People say, I can't live without my brownies, my ice cream, you know, etc. But when you cut it out, you don't have an interest in it anymore. The same thing happens with people who have bariatric surgery where they cut out their stomach in order to lose weight. Within 2 or 3 days after their surgery, they report, the doctors were totally perplexed by this, that they no longer have an interest in eating high carbohydrate foods. It's not interesting to them. You know, they'll say, a week ago before the surgery, I couldn't walk by a plate of brownies without eating 2 or 3. Now I walk by a plate of brownies and say, what's that? Okay? It's a brain change. It's not something you decide to do, it's something your brain tells you to do. And we don't quite understand why that
I
happens.
was on a diet, something like that, similar to that, right?
Yep,
This doctor had written a book, I can't think of his name, and all he talked about was the same thing you're talking
Yep.
about the high-fat diets. And I tried it, it worked.
right. Okay, did you all hear that? She tried this high-fat, low-carb diet and it worked.
I wasn't hungry.
Okay. Well, you weren't hungry.
I wasn't hungry.
And let me ask you the $64,000 question. Why did you stop?
I didn't stop.
Oh, you kept it up.
I kept it up.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, until things started going nuts.
Right.
You know,
That's it.
things were bothering me, and
Right.
it's like a cigarette.
That's it.
Things
Right.
bother me,
Yep.
right, I gotta have the cigarette.
That's the
Everybody
story
does.
I hear all the time. People go
So
on
I'm off of
high-fat,
it.
low-carb diets and do wonderfully with them. The doctors love it, okay? All their numbers improve, the cholesterol comes down, the blood pressure comes down, everything gets better, and they do just fine with it. And then some stressful event happens or one thing or another.
Yeah.
And we are all surrounded by carbohydrates, are we not?
Right.
What's for lunch today?
Sandwich.
Okay, what's the soup?
What is it?
Chicken soup.
Chicken soup, but is it just chicken and broth?
No.
It's got noodles in it, doesn't it? Right.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, most chicken's soup does. Okay, so it's got pasta in the soup and then bread with a sandwich. You're
Right.
probably getting, my guess is somewhere around 25, 30 grams of carbohydrates in that one little meal. Okay, I eat less than 20 a day, okay, and you're getting more in your lunch than I eat all day. Now, if you really want to take this message seriously, don't eat the pasta in the soup. What's the sandwich?
Grilled cheese.
That would be tough. But you could just eat the cheese, is what I'm saying. Okay, I know you can't do a grilled cheese sandwich without grilling the bread. Okay, but that's a good part of the reason why people don't stick with low carb diets is that it's difficult because the world is full of carbohydrates, and unless you plan carefully, do some cooking at home, and I even do things like when I go to a public health conference. You know, and the public health people are all, oh, we need to have low-fat foods. And they say ahead of, when you register for the conference, do you have any special dietary needs? And I say, yes, I want high-fat foods. And I get there, and there's no high-fat foods there. They don't even, they think, first of all, I'm going to kill myself by eating high-fat. And second of all, they don't have it, okay? So I picked my way through some vegetables and maybe a little meat or something there. But it's an example of how the world will constantly offer you the high-carb, low-fat version of things, which makes it difficult. If the world would adjust a little to this, and you know, instead of having sugary desserts in a restaurant or after a meal or a party, have some nuts and cheese. That's what the French eat, you know? Why not? Why do we always have to end every meal with sugar? Okay, when sugar has recently been indicted by, there's a new book by Gary Taubes who wrote the How to Lose Weight article about the case, it's called The Case Against Sugar. And he talks about how sugar is more than likely the singular cause of diabetes increases around the world. And he'll tell you that the amount of sugar we've been eating has been going up astronomically for the last 100 years. Okay? And so has diabetes, heart disease, and you ready for this one? Cancer. Okay? And there's a case to be made that high carbohydrates stimulate or at least assist cancer growth in the body. We know that cancer cells grow in glucose, in blood sugar. Okay? That's a fact. What we haven't established yet is a direct causal link between high carb diets and cancers. But we're working on it. Also, Alzheimer's disease. There's a researcher over at Brown University right now who calls Alzheimer's disease type 3 diabetes. We have type 1 that you get, it's an autoimmune disease and usually happens in childhood. That's different than type 2. Type 2 is the kind that we acquire over a lifetime of eating carbohydrates. And type 3, she's saying, is Alzheimer's comes from the same cause as type 2, too much blood sugar. You've been a great audience, okay? I'll stop now and take a few more questions and let you go so you can have your high-carb lunch here and enjoy that. If you want to know more about this, do any of you go online on your computer? Yeah, okay. If you go to this page, gfrpartners.com, lowcarbs.html, that's my page. I've got hundreds of videos, articles, the whole course that I teach is on there, 10 different lessons and all that kind of stuff. Or you can go in person on Saturday and learn more about it. Another great place to go is a website called dietdoctor.com. And if you want to know more about this, write that down, dietdoctor.com. It's out of Sweden. Sweden, by the way, is the only country in the world that has lowered its incidence of obesity. Why? 23% of people in Sweden are on low-carb diets. They bought it completely. In fact, in Sweden, there was a doctor who was recommending low-carb diets. The physicians and the medical board in the country took her to task and said, we're going to take your license away if you keep saying this. And she said, no, look at the research. They did. They reversed their whole set of recommendations. They're the only country now whose dietary guidelines say eat fat, lower carbs. Okay? Not us, Sweden. And their obesity rates are already going down. Dietdoctor.com. Dietdoctor.com. It's a great website. Lots of pictures, recipes, easy to read. There are all kinds of videos. You can, there's a whole, you just click on diabetes at the top. It'll give you menus, gives you stories about people who've done this. It's got everything. It's a wonderful, it's free. Well, you can get your diabetes cooking books, but a lot of them will still say eat carbs. They do. And a lot of...
that wasn't for me, it was my...
Oh, okay. Well,
when I moved,
yep.
I took them with me.
There are diabetic websites, there are all kinds of people, and just keep looking to see how many carbohydrates they're recommending. How many people know somebody on a gluten-free diet, you know, can't eat wheat and stuff like that? Anybody know that? Okay, you are. You're on that diet, right. Does anybody object when you say, well, I can't eat that because it's got wheat flour in it, right? Nobody says, oh, that's crazy. You should eat this. No. Right, and now the manufacturers have many gluten-free products.
Restaurants are getting gluten-free.
Right, restaurants are doing that, exactly. But you tell somebody, I'm carbohydrate sensitive or insensitive, okay, and people think you're nuts. What do you mean you're not eating that pie? You say, it's got too many carbs, it's not good for me. I get sick with that, okay? So that's the kind of attitude that we need to be promoting more and more support. Well, again, you've been a great audience. Thank you very much. If you have any other questions, be sure to talk to me. You're welcome.